In this gripping story about racism in America, Dr. Maya Thompson, a successful black surgeon, faces relentless opposition while trying to open a much-needed clinic in a small town. Her plans are derailed by a corrupt councilman using bureaucratic tactics, racist undertones, and smear campaigns to block her progress. Maya endures public humiliation, baseless accusations, and overt threats, all while exposing the deep-seated biases and systemic corruption protecting those in power. As tensions rise, her fight becomes a powerful lesson in resilience and the devastating consequences of prejudice. Will justice prevail in the face of such entrenched racism? Dr. Maya Thompson adjusted the cuffs of her well-worn denim jacket as she walked down the bustling main street of Eldridge, the small town she had moved to a year ago. The sun peeked through thick clouds, casting a muted glow over the rows of mom-and-pop shops and aging brick facades. This was her favorite time of day. Quiet, unassuming, and untouched by the weight of the expectations that came with being Dr. Thompson. Here, on these streets, no one cared that she was one of the most sought-after surgeons in the country. They didn't know about the groundbreaking procedures she had pioneered or the countless lives she had saved. To them, she was just another face in the crowd, and that anonymity was both a blessing and a curse. Maya had grown up in a working-class neighborhood, far removed from the luxury her career afforded her now. Yet she had never let success cloud her perspective. Her wealth meant nothing if it didn't serve a greater purpose, and so, she had poured her resources into causes that mattered, building clinics in underserved communities, funding scholarships for students of color, and offering mentorship to aspiring young professionals who often felt the same crushing weight of societal prejudice she had faced. Today, she was heading to the diner at the corner of Maple and Fifth. It wasn't much to look at: chipped paint, flickering neon signs, but the smell of fresh coffee and warm biscuits reminded her of home. She pushed the door open, a small bell jingling above her head. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of grease and syrup, and the soft murmur of conversation filled the space. "Morning, Doc," called Ruthie, the diner's owner, from behind the counter. She was a wiry woman with a sharp wit and a heart of gold, her hands perpetually dusted with flour. "The usual?" Maya smiled and nodded, sliding into her usual booth near the window. "Thanks, Ruthie." As she waited, she pulled out her tablet, skimming through emails. Most were routine: updates from her team at the foundation, meeting requests, and a few thank you notes from patients. But one email caught her eye. It was from the town council, informing her of yet another delay in approving the permits for the mobile clinic she had been fighting to establish for months. Her jaw tightened as she read the carefully worded excuse. It was the same rhetoric she had heard before: concerns about zoning, potential disruption to local businesses, and other thinly veiled objections that boiled down to resistance against change. Maya had seen it all before: the subtle ways systems worked to preserve inequities under the guise of bureaucracy. "Here you go, Doc," Ruthie said, breaking Maya's train of thought as she placed a steaming cup of coffee and a plate of scrambled eggs in front of her. "Thanks, Ruthie." Maya forced a smile, folding the tablet closed. "You look like you've got the weight of the world on your shoulders," Ruthie said, sliding into the seat across from her. "Anything you want to talk about?" Maya hesitated. Ruthie was one of the few people in town who had taken the time to get to know her beyond surface pleasantries, but even so, the complexities of what Maya faced weren't easy to explain. "Just more red tape," she said finally, stirring her coffee. "You know how it is?" Ruthie snorted. "Oh, I know. This town's got a knack for finding problems where there aren't any, especially when it comes to folks trying to do some good. Don't let 'em get to you." Maya nodded, appreciating the sentiment, but knowing the battle was far from over. As Ruthie stood to return to the counter, the door jingled again, and Maya glanced up instinctively. A man in a dark suit strode in, his posture stiff and his expression sharp. He was out of place among the flannel shirts and denim jackets that filled the diner, and it wasn't long before his gaze locked onto her. "Dr. Thompson?" he asked, his voice clipped. Maya raised an eyebrow. "Yes?" "I'm Officer Daniels," he said, flashing a badge. "I need a word with you." The diner grew quieter, the hum of conversations dimming as heads turned to watch. Maya felt a familiar knot of tension form in her stomach. She set her coffee cup down deliberately, meeting Daniels' gaze. "What's this about?" Daniels didn't answer immediately. Instead, he gestured toward the door. I'd prefer we discuss this outside. Maya glanced around the diner. The regulars were watching now, their curiosity barely concealed. Ruthie's eyes narrowed, her hands resting on her hips. Whatever this was, it wasn't good. Fine, Maya said, rising from her seat. She followed Daniels outside, the bell jingling as the door swung shut behind them. The air outside was brisk, the faint scent of rain lingering in the breeze. Daniels turned to face her, his expression unreadable. We've received a complaint about you. Maya frowned. A complaint from who? He hesitated, glancing around as if to ensure no one was eavesdropping. A council member. They've raised concerns about your clinic project. Maya's heart sank, but she kept her expression neutral. And what exactly are these concerns? They're alleging some irregularities in your funding sources, Daniels said, his tone careful. Enough to warrant an investigation. Maya stared at him, a mix of disbelief and frustration washing over her. Irregularities? That's absurd. Every cent of funding for the clinic has been accounted for. This is nothing more than a smear campaign. Daniels shrugged, his face impassive. I'm just doing my job, ma'am. If there's nothing to hide, I'm sure it'll all clear up. Maya crossed her arms, her voice steady but firm. And if there is something to hide, what then will you shut the project down, leave this community without the healthcare it desperately needs? Daniels didn't respond, his eyes narrowing slightly as he studied her. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the tension between them thick and unyielding. Finally, Daniels broke the silence. Just cooperate, Dr. Thompson. It'll go easier for everyone. Maya held his gaze, refusing to flinch. She knew men like Daniels, gatekeepers of a system that thrived on silencing those who dared to challenge it. But she wasn't about to back down. Thank you for your concern, officer, she said evenly, turning to head back into the diner. I'll be sure to contact my lawyer. Maya stepped back into the diner, the warmth inside doing little to chase away the chill that had settled over her. The murmur of conversations resumed, but the curious glances and hushed whispers made it clear that her exchange with Officer Daniels had not gone unnoticed. She returned to her booth, her breakfast untouched, appetite lost. Ruthie approached cautiously, concern etched on her face. Everything okay, hun? Maya forced a reassuring smile. Just a misunderstanding, nothing to worry about. Ruthie didn't look convinced, but knew better than to pry. Well, you let me know if you need anything. She gave Maya's shoulder a gentle squeeze before moving on to attend other customers. Maya stared out the window, watching as Daniels lingered outside before finally getting into his patrol car and driving away. She couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a larger problem. The town council's resistance to her clinic had been persistent, but this was a new low, alleging financial misconduct without any basis. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of someone sliding into the seat across from her. She looked up to see a middle-aged man with a friendly demeanor and a neatly trimmed beard. He extended his hand. Dr. Thompson, right, I'm Tom Willis. Maya hesitated before shaking his hand. Yes, that's me, and you are? Editor of the Eldridge Daily. I couldn't help but notice that little chat you had with Officer Daniels. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. Care to comment? She sighed inwardly. The last thing she needed was media attention that could twist the situation further. I appreciate your interest, Mr. Willis, but there's nothing to comment on. Tom gave her an understanding nod. Off the record then, I've heard whispers about the pushback you're getting on your clinic. It's a noble endeavor, and it's a shame some folks can't see that. Maya studied him for a moment, gauging his sincerity. It's more than just pushback. They're trying to shut it down before it even starts. Mind if I ask why? She took a deep breath. Officially, it's bureaucratic hurdles, permits, zoning laws, that sort of thing. Unofficially, it's fear of change, of what the clinic represents. Tom nodded slowly. Change can be unsettling for a small town, especially when it challenges the status quo. That's putting it mildly, Maya replied dryly. He offered a sympathetic smile. Well, if you ever want to tell your side of the story, my door's open. He placed a business card on the table. Sometimes, shedding a little light can make all the difference. Thanks, she said, slipping the card into her pocket. I'll keep that in mind. As Tom left, Maya glanced at her watch. She had a meeting with the construction team in half an hour. Deciding it was best to keep moving, she left some cash on the table and headed out. The construction site for the clinic was a vacant lot on the edge of town. When she arrived, the foreman, Jack Reynolds, was already there, examining blueprints with a couple of workers. He looked up as she approached. "Morning, Dr. Thompson," he said, tipping his hard hat. "Good morning, Jack. How are things progressing?" He scratched his beard thoughtfully. "Well, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. We've hit a bit of a snag." Her shoulders tensed. "What kind of snag?" Jack exchanged a glance with his team before responding. "Got a visit from the county inspector this morning. Says we need to halt all work pending a review." Maya's eyes narrowed. "On what grounds?" "Something about environmental impact studies not being thorough enough. But between you and me, it smells fishy. We've complied with all regulations." She clenched her jaw, a mixture of frustration and disbelief bubbling up. "This is deliberate. They're throwing everything they can at us to stop this project." Jack gave a sympathetic nod. "Wouldn't be the first time I've seen politics get in the way of progress." She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "All right, let's get our legal team on this. In the meantime, make sure everything is secured here. We can't afford any setbacks." "Will do, Doc." As she walked back to her car, Maya pulled out her phone to call her attorney, Linda Martinez. Linda had been instrumental in navigating the initial legal hurdles, and Maya trusted her implicitly. "Linda, it's Maya," she said when the call connected. "Hey, Maya, what's up?" She quickly filled her in on the latest developments. Linda sighed on the other end. "They're really grasping at straws now. I'll file an immediate appeal and request an injunction to continue construction." "Thank you. I don't know how much more of this we can take." "Hang in there. They're trying to wear you down, but we've got the law on our side." After hanging up, Maya sat in her car for a moment, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. She had expected resistance, but not to this extent. It was exhausting, fighting against a system that seemed determined to see her fail. Later that afternoon, Maya decided to visit the town council office to address the issues head-on. The receptionist, a young woman with a polite smile, looked up as she entered. "Good afternoon. How can I help you?" "I'm here to see Councilman Harris," Maya said. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but it's urgent." The receptionist hesitated. "Let me check if he's available." After a brief phone call, she looked up apologetically. "I'm sorry, but Councilman Harris is in a meeting." Maya glanced toward the hallway that led to the offices. "I'll wait." 20 minutes passed before Councilman Harris emerged, walking alongside another man in a suit. Spotting Maya, he raised an eyebrow. "Dr. Thompson, to what do I owe the pleasure?" She approached him, extending her hand, which he shook briefly. "I was hoping to discuss the issues surrounding the clinic's construction." He offered a tight smile. "I've already explained the situation in our correspondence. All procedures must be followed to the letter." "And they have been," she insisted. "Every requirement has been met, yet new obstacles keep appearing." Harris's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Well, perhaps if you had more experience with projects of this scale, you'd understand the complexities involved." Maya felt a flush rise to her cheeks. "With all due respect, I've managed projects far larger than this. The only complexity here seems to be the ever-changing regulations applied exclusively to this clinic." He chuckled softly. "Now, let's not make this personal. We're simply ensuring that all standards are met for the safety and well-being of our community." "Is that what you're ensuring?" she asked, her voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath the surface. "Because from where I stand, it looks like deliberate obstruction." His expression hardened. "Careful, Dr. Thompson. Accusations like that can have consequences." "Is that a threat?" "Simply advice." Before she could respond, he turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the corridor. She clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms. It was infuriating, the subtle dismissals, the condescending tone, the veiled warnings. As she exited the building, she nearly collided with a young woman carrying a stack of files. "Sorry," the woman exclaimed, fumbling to keep the papers from spilling. "It's okay," Maya said, helping her steady the load. "Thank you," the woman said, offering a grateful smile. "Rough day?" "You could say that." The woman glanced around before leaning in slightly. If you're dealing with Harris, I don't envy you. He's got a reputation for being difficult. That's one way to put it. She hesitated before adding, just be careful, he doesn't like being challenged. Maya studied her for a moment. Do we know each other? Not officially. I'm Elena Morales, assistant to Councilwoman Davis. Nice to meet you, Elena. Any advice on how to navigate this maze of red tape? Elena glanced over her shoulder before lowering her voice. Off the record, there's a council meeting tomorrow night, public forum. It might be a good opportunity to make your case directly. Thanks for the tip. Elena nodded. Good luck. That evening, Maya sat at her kitchen table, papers strewn about, legal documents, project proposals, correspondence with the council. She rubbed her temples, exhaustion creeping in. Her phone buzzed, and she saw a text from Linda. Heard about your run-in with Harris. Be careful, he's got connections. Maya typed back. Noted. There's a public meeting tomorrow, thinking of attending. Good idea. Make your voice heard. I'm here if you need anything. She put the phone down and sighed. Part of her wondered if it was worth all this trouble. But then she thought about the people who would benefit from the clinic. The families without access to proper health care, the children who needed vaccinations, the elderly who required regular checkups. They were the reason she couldn't back down. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Frowning, she glanced at the clock. It was nearly 9 p.m. She wasn't expecting anyone. She opened the door to find Officer Daniels standing on her porch, hat in hand. Evening, Dr. Thompson, he said. Officer Daniels, she replied cautiously. Can I help you? He shifted uncomfortably. May I come in? She hesitated before stepping aside. All right. They moved to the living room, and she gestured for him to sit. He remained standing. Look, he began. I wanted to apologize for this morning. I was just following orders, but I realize now that I might have overstepped. She raised an eyebrow. Orders from whom? He avoided her gaze. From the council, Harris specifically. I see. He finally met her eyes. Off the record, there's been talk around the station Harris is pushing hard to shut down your project. Some of us think it's not right. Some of you? He sighed. This town has its ways. People in power like to keep things the way they are. Change makes them nervous. Why are you telling me this? Because you should know that they're not going to play fair, and I don't want to be part of something unjust. Maya studied him, searching for any sign of deceit. I appreciate your honesty, but what am I supposed to do with this information? Be prepared, and maybe consider finding allies who can help you level the playing field. She nodded slowly. Thank you, Officer Daniels. He gave a small nod. Good evening, ma'am. With that, he turned and left. As the door closed behind him, Maya felt a mixture of relief and unease. It seemed she wasn't entirely alone in this fight, but knowing that the opposition was willing to manipulate law enforcement was troubling. The next day, Maya arrived early at the town hall for the council meeting. The auditorium was already filling up, a low buzz of conversation filling the air. She spotted Elena waving at her from a row near the front. Glad you made it, Elena said, as Maya sat down beside her. Wouldn't miss it. As the council members took their seats on the dais, Maya noticed Harris glancing her way, a slight smirk on his face. Councilwoman Davis, a stern but fair-minded woman, called the meeting to order. After the usual proceedings, the floor was opened for public comments. Maya stood, smoothing the creases from her skirt, before approaching the microphone. Good evening, council members, she began, her voice steady. I'm Dr. Maya Thompson, and I'd like to address the ongoing delays related to the construction of the new community clinic. Harris leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on her. I've complied with every regulation, met every requirement, and yet obstacles continue to arise. This clinic is not just a project, it's a necessary resource for our town's most vulnerable populations. Murmurs rippled through the audience. I urge the council to reconsider the hold on the construction and allow us to proceed. Delaying this project only harms the community you're sworn to serve. Councilwoman Davis nodded appreciatively. Thank you, Dr. Thompson. Your dedication is commendable. Before she could step away, Harris leaned forward, his expression one of feigned concern. Dr. Thompson, while we appreciate your efforts, There are legitimate concerns about the project's impact financial transparency. For instance, can you assure us that all funding is above board? Maya met his gaze unflinchingly. Absolutely. All financial records are available for review. There is nothing to hide. He smiled thinly. That's good to hear. However, some constituents have expressed worries about the increase in traffic and noise in the area. How do you propose to mitigate these issues? She resisted the urge to roll her eyes. The clinic's operating hours will be standard, and we've conducted traffic studies that show minimal impact. Any concerns can be addressed with appropriate measures. Harris spread his hands theatrically. Well, perhaps a postponement is in order until all parties are satisfied. Frustration bubbled up. Councilman Harris, with all due respect, continuous postponements serve no one. They only delay essential services to those in need. Applause broke out from several attendees. Harris's eyes flickered with annoyance. Councilwoman Davis interjected. I believe Dr. Thompson has addressed the concerns adequately. I propose we put the continuation of the clinic's construction to a vote. Harris opened his mouth to object, but she cut him off. All in favor? A majority of hands went up. Motion carried, Davis declared, a hint of a smile on her face. Relief washed over Maya, but it was short-lived, as Harris leaned over to whisper something to a colleague, his expression dark. After the meeting, Elena caught up with Maya in the hallway. That was impressive, she said. Thanks, but I doubt Harris will let this go. Probably not, Elena agreed, but you made significant progress tonight. As they parted ways, Maya headed toward the exit, only to find Harris waiting by the door. Dr. Thompson, he said smoothly. A moment? She paused. Yes? He stepped closer, his voice low. You may have won this round, but don't think for a second that this is over. She squared her shoulders. Is that another one of your veiled threats? He chuckled softly. Just a friendly warning, you might find that things become complicated if you continue down this path. Are you threatening me, Councilman? Of course not, he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. Simply advising caution. She met his gaze steadily. I won't be intimidated by you or anyone else. This clinic is happening, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. We'll see about that, he replied, before turning on his heel and walking away. Maya stood there for a moment, her heart pounding. The confrontation had been more direct than any before, and it left her with a gnawing sense of unease. As she stepped out into the cool night air, she couldn't shake the feeling that Harris's influence reached further than she had anticipated. The battle was far from over, but she was more determined than ever to see it through. The morning after the town council meeting, Maya woke to the sharp buzz of her phone vibrating incessantly on her nightstand. She groggily reached for it and saw a series of notifications, news alerts, text messages, and missed calls. Her stomach churned as she unlocked the phone. The first message was from Linda. Call me ASAP, something's happened. The second was a news alert from the Eldridge Daily. Financial misconduct allegations rock community clinic project. Maya sat up straight, her heart pounding. She opened the article, dread creeping over her. The piece claimed that funds for the clinic were tied to questionable sources, hinting at embezzlement and illegal activity. Though the accusations were vague, the implications were damning. The article quoted anonymous sources from the town council, as well as a brief statement from Councilman Harris, expressing concern over the integrity of the project. Her phone buzzed again, this time a call from Linda. Linda, what's going on? Maya asked, her voice tight. Morning, Maya, Linda said, her tone sharp with urgency. Harris is behind this. I've been trying to trace the source of the allegations, and all roads lead back to him. Maya clenched her fist. But there's no basis for this, every dollar is accounted for. It doesn't matter right now, Linda said. Public perception is the real danger here. If we don't get ahead of this, it could derail everything. Maya inhaled deeply, steadying herself. What's our next move? First, I need you to stay calm, Linda said. Second, I want you to hold a press conference. Set the record straight before this snowballs any further. Do you think you can handle that? I don't have much of a choice, Maya said grimly. Let's do it. By midday, A small crowd of reporters had gathered outside the town hall. Maya stood at a hastily set up podium, a microphone in front of her. Linda stood off to the side, her arms crossed, and her expression stern. "Good afternoon," Maya began, her voice firm despite the tremor she felt in her chest. "I want to address the baseless allegations that have been circulating about the funding for the Eldridge Community Clinic." Flashes went off as photographers captured her every word. "These claims are not only false, but are a deliberate attempt to discredit a project that seeks to provide vital healthcare services to underserved members of our community. Every dollar for this clinic has been sourced legally and transparently. I invite anyone with concerns to review the publicly available financial records." Before she could continue, a voice interrupted her from the crowd. "Dr. Thompson, how do you respond to claims that you're using this clinic to push a personal agenda?" Maya's eyes scanned the sea of faces, landing on the speaker. A local reporter she recognized as being friendly with Councilman Harris. She straightened her posture. "My agenda is simple: to improve access to healthcare for those who need it most. If that's controversial, so be it." The reporter wasn't finished. "Councilman Harris claims there's evidence to suggest misuse of funds. Can you definitively deny this?" "Yes," Maya said, her voice firm. "There is no misuse, none." Before she could elaborate, a commotion broke out at the back of the crowd. Maya's stomach dropped as she saw Officer Daniels and another uniformed officer pushing through. Daniels wore a grim expression, and in his hands was a folded piece of paper. "Dr. Thompson," Daniels said as he reached the podium, "we have a warrant for your arrest." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Maya's pulse raced. "On what charges?" she demanded, her voice sharper than she intended. Daniels unfolded the paper, his tone carefully neutral. "Fraud and embezzlement." The crowd erupted into chaos, reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing, and murmurs spreading like wildfire. Maya felt as if the ground beneath her had shifted. "I didn't do this," she said, her voice steady but laced with anger. "You're making a mistake." "Ma'am," Daniel said, his expression tight, "please come with us." Maya turned to Linda, who nodded firmly. "I'll handle this, just stay calm." With her chin held high, Maya allowed herself to be handcuffed in front of the crowd, her heart pounding as she heard the clicks of the cuffs. The symbolism wasn't lost on her. The powerful black surgeon brought low in the most public way possible, but she refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. The ride to the station was tense. Daniel sat in the front seat, his silence heavy. Maya studied him in the rearview mirror. "This isn't you, Daniels," she said finally. "I can tell you don't believe this." He hesitated before responding. "It's not my job to believe or disbelieve, Dr. Thompson. It's my job to enforce the law." "Even when the law is being weaponized?" she shot back. Daniels glanced at her in the mirror, but he didn't reply. At the station, Maya was fingerprinted and photographed. The humiliation of the process burned in her chest, but she remained outwardly composed. Linda arrived shortly after, filing paperwork to secure her release on bail. As they sat in the waiting area, Maya leaned toward Linda. "How far does Harris's influence reach?" "Far enough to pull this off," Linda replied, "but we'll expose him. I've already filed for an expedited review of the charges. We'll clear your name." Maya nodded, but the weight of the situation pressed heavily on her. She thought of the clinic, of the people counting on her. This wasn't just about her reputation. This was about their future. That evening, Maya returned home to find her yard littered with signs and messages. Some were supportive. "We stand with Dr. Thompson." Others were hateful. "Go back to where you came from." She collected the signs quietly, her hands trembling. When she reached the last one, a rock wrapped in paper, she froze. The message was scrawled in bold, angry letters. "Stop now. Or else." Maya's breath hitched, but she quickly regained control. She wouldn't let fear dictate her actions. Instead, she went inside, locking the door behind her. The next day, Maya met with Linda and Tom Willis in a small cafe. The editor had reached out after the arrest, offering to help uncover the truth. "I've been digging into Harris's connections," Tom said, pulling out a folder. "Turns out he's got ties to several developers who'd benefit if your clinic doesn't go through. They've been lobbying hard to block it." Maya's eyes narrowed. So this isn't just personal. It's financial. Exactly, Tom said. And the financial misconduct allegations, they're coming from a group tied to one of those developers. Linda tapped her pen against the table. If we can prove this, we can not only clear your name, but also expose Harris for the fraud he's committing. Maya's resolve hardened. What do we need? Tom leaned in, his voice low. Documents, records, anything that connects Harris to these developers. I have a source who might be able to help, but it's risky. Risky how? Maya asked. They're close to Harris, Tom said. If we're not careful, this could blow back on all of us. Maya nodded, her jaw set. Whatever it takes. As evening fell, Maya prepared to meet Tom's source. She knew the risks, but she also knew she couldn't back down. Her entire life had been a fight against odds, and this was no different. Linda's voice echoed in her mind. Stay calm. Stay focused. We'll get through this. Maya stepped into the shadows of the rendezvous point, her heart pounding as she waited. The stakes had never felt higher. Maya's heart raced as she stood under the dim glow of the street lamp at the edge of the abandoned parking lot. Shadows danced around her, the flicker of distant neon signs the only other source of light. Tom's source was late, and the tension was wearing her thin. She clenched her fists, inhaling the cool night air in an attempt to calm herself. The events of the past 48 hours replayed in her mind. The baseless arrest, the humiliation of the public spectacle, and the hate-filled threats thrown at her doorstep. Every move Harris made seemed calculated to crush her resolve. Yet, with each attack, Maya felt her determination solidify further. This fight was bigger than her. It was for everyone who deserved a voice in a system designed to silence them. A car engine broke the silence, its low rumble drawing closer. Maya tensed as the vehicle pulled up, its headlights cutting through the darkness. The driver's door creaked open, and a figure emerged, shrouded in a heavy coat. "You're Maya Thompson?" the figure asked, their voice low and cautious. "Yes," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "And you are?" "Call me Grace," the woman said, glancing around nervously before stepping closer. "Tom told me you're looking for proof I can help, but we have to be quick." Maya nodded. "What do you have?" Grace handed her a manila envelope. "Copies of emails, financial records, and contracts. They tie Harris and the developers directly to payments aimed at blocking your clinic." Maya opened the envelope, her eyes scanning the documents. The evidence was damning, clear trails of corruption that would expose Harris's ulterior motives. Relief and fury churned in her chest as she realized the depth of the betrayal. "Why are you helping me?" Maya asked, her voice soft. Grace hesitated. "Because I've seen too many good people like you crushed by this town's power games. Harris thinks he's untouchable, but he's wrong. If anyone can take him down, it's you." Before Maya could respond, another car screeched into the lot, its headlights glaring like twin spotlights. Grace froze, panic flashing across her face. "They found me," she whispered, her voice trembling. Two men stepped out of the car, their silhouettes imposing as they advanced. Maya's stomach sank as she recognized one of them. Mitchell, Harris's right-hand enforcer. "Well, well," Mitchell said, his tone dripping with mockery. "Dr. Thompson, out for a late-night stroll?" "Go home, Mitchell," Maya said, her voice firm. "You don't want to be part of this." "Oh, but I think I do," he replied, pulling out a folded piece of paper. "I've got a cease and desist order here. Whatever you're planning ends tonight." Maya squared her shoulders, refusing to back down. "You can't silence me with empty threats. I have the proof I need to expose Harris and everyone involved." Mitchell's smirk faltered, and his eyes flicked to the envelope in Maya's hands. "Hand that over." "No," she said, her voice unwavering. "This ends now." Grace shifted nervously beside her. "We need to go," she whispered. "Now." Mitchell took a step closer, his tone darkening. "This isn't a game. Thompson, hand it over, or things will get messy." Maya's pulse thundered in her ears, but she didn't flinch. "If you want it, you'll have to take it from me." Mitchell hesitated, the weight of her words hanging in the cold air. The tension was palpable, every second stretching into eternity. Finally, he scowled, motioning for the other man to retreat. "This isn't over," Mitchell said, his voice laced with venom. "You've made an enemy you can't afford, Dr. Thompson." As the men climbed back into their car and sped away, Maya exhaled shakily. Grace tugged at her sleeve. "We need to get out of here, they'll be back." Maya nodded, gripping the envelope tightly as they hurried toward her car. Rising pressure. The next morning, the fallout began. Harris's allies in the media painted Maya as a troublemaker, accusing her of fabricating the allegations against him. The headlines screamed, "Community clinic scandal deepens. Is Dr. Thompson the real villain?" Linda called early. "We need to go public with the evidence now. The longer we wait, the more control Harris has over the narrative." "Let's do it," Maya said firmly. "Set up a press briefing. It's time the truth comes out." The press conference was held at the clinic site, the empty lot symbolic of the fight Maya was waging. A podium stood in front of a banner that read, "Healthcare for all, no more delays." Reporters buzzed with anticipation as Maya approached the microphone. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice steady despite the nerves swirling in her chest. "In recent days, I have been the target of baseless accusations aimed at discrediting my efforts to bring healthcare to our community. Today, I'm here to set the record straight." She held up the manila envelope. "This is evidence of systemic corruption involving Councilman Harris and several developers who have worked to block the Eldridge Community Clinic for their own financial gain. These documents show payments, communications, and coordinated efforts to derail this project." The reporters erupted with questions, their voices overlapping in a cacophony. Maya held up a hand, silencing them. "I am submitting these documents to the authorities and demanding a full investigation. This community deserves better than leaders who prioritize profit over people." As she stepped away from the podium, she caught sight of Harris standing at the edge of the crowd, his expression cold and calculating. He made no move to speak, but his presence was a threat in itself. A sudden blow. That evening, as Maya returned home, her phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. She hesitated before answering. "Dr. Thompson?" a deep voice asked. "Yes, who's this?" "This is Detective Harper with the State Attorney's Office. We've reviewed the documents you submitted, and we believe there's merit to your claims. However—" He paused, and Maya's stomach tightened. "However, what?" "There's been a counterclaim. Harris is accusing you of doctoring evidence. He's calling for an immediate review of your financial records." Maya's grip tightened on the phone. "This is a tactic to discredit me. He's trying to muddy the waters." "I understand, but until we can verify everything, your clinic's permits have been frozen." Maya's chest tightened. "You're letting him win." "No, ma'am. We're ensuring this is handled properly. Stay the course. The truth will come out." As the call ended, Maya leaned against the wall, her mind racing. Harris was doubling down, using every tool at his disposal to delay justice. But Maya wasn't going to stop. If anything, this only steeled her resolve. Cliffhanger setup. The next morning, Maya prepared for a town council meeting, where she planned to confront Harris publicly. Linda and Tom joined her outside the council building, both offering words of encouragement. "Are you ready?" Linda asked. Maya nodded, clutching the envelope. "More than ever." As they entered the chamber, the tension was palpable. Harris sat at the head of the council table, his smug expression daring her to challenge him. The room was packed with townsfolk, their faces a mix of curiosity, support, and skepticism. Maya took a seat in the front row, her heart pounding as the meeting began. She knew the stakes couldn't be higher. This wasn't just about her clinic, it was about exposing the rot at the core of the system. When Harris called for public comments, Maya rose, holding her head high. The room fell silent as she approached the microphone. "Council members," she began, her voice clear and resolute. "I have come today to demand accountability. The time for games is over." Harris leaned back in his chair, his smirk faltering slightly as she pulled out the envelope. "These documents," she continued, "prove that Councilman Harris has been using his position to obstruct a vital community project for personal gain. It's time for the people of Eldridge to see the truth." The crowd murmured. The atmosphere charged with anticipation. Harris's face darkened, his mask of confidence slipping as Maya placed the documents on the table before him. "Explain this," she said, her voice sharp and unyielding. The room erupted into chaos as Harris stammered, his composure cracking under the weight of the evidence. But as Maya stood her ground, a shadow of doubt crept into her mind. Harris wouldn't go down without a fight. What would his next move be? The council chamber buzzed with tension as Maya's words reverberated through the room. Her unwavering voice had silenced the crowd, every eye now locked on the stack of damning documents she'd laid before the council. Councilman Harris's smirk faltered, his fingers twitching slightly as he reached for the papers. The room felt electric, charged with the anticipation of what would come next. Harris cleared his throat, his usual bravado masked behind a feigned calm. Dr. Thompson, while I admire your passion for this project, these accusations are reckless at best. Let's not forget that you yourself are under investigation for financial misconduct. Maya stepped closer to the microphone, her gaze piercing. And who initiated that investigation, Councilman? You did, right after I challenged your attempts to block this clinic. These documents don't just show obstruction, they expose the lengths you're willing to go to protect your own interests. The audience murmured, whispers spreading like wildfire. Harris stiffened, his eyes darting toward Mitchell, who sat in the back corner of the room, arms crossed. A silent signal passed between them, a flicker of desperation that Maya didn't miss. Harris straightened in his seat. This meeting is not the place for baseless theatrics, Dr. Thompson. If you have concerns, you should address them through the proper channels. Proper channels? Maya repeated, her voice rising. Like the ones you've corrupted, the ones you've manipulated to smear my name and delay this project for months. Enough with the charade, Harris. The people in this room deserve the truth. Applause broke out from a section of the audience, emboldening Maya. She turned to the crowd. How many of you have seen firsthand the need for this clinic? How many of you have waited hours, or days, for medical care because this town refuses to invest in its people? A wave of nods and murmured agreements rippled through the room. Councilman Harris would rather line his pockets and protect his allies than ensure our community has access to basic health care, Maya continued. This isn't just about a clinic, it's about who we are as a town and what we're willing to stand for. The turning point. Harris slammed his hand on the table, the sharp crack echoing through the chamber. Enough! He barked, his carefully constructed facade slipping. You have no idea what you're talking about. Maya held her ground. Then explain these payments. She pointed to the documents. Explain the emails coordinating with developers to block permits. Explain the intimidation tactics used against me and my team. Harris's face reddened. You think you're so righteous, don't you? Coming into this town, acting like you're better than us, people like you always think you can waltz in and fix things without understanding the consequences. The room fell silent at his words, the thinly veiled racism hanging in the air like a toxic fog. People like me? Maya said quietly, her voice razor sharp. Say it, Harris. Say what you really mean. Harris stammered, his confidence crumbling under the weight of her challenge. I'm talking about outsiders, meddlers, who don't understand the delicate balance of this town. That's not what you meant, Maya shot back. You meant someone who looks like me, a black woman who refuses to stay silent, who refuses to accept the status quo. The crowd erupted again, this time with a mix of anger and support. Harris's allies shifted uncomfortably in their seats, realizing the tide was turning against him. The revelation. Suddenly, a voice rang out from the back of the room. She's right. All heads turned to see Grace standing near the exit, her coat pulled tightly around her. Her face was pale but resolute as she stepped forward. What are you doing here? Harris snapped, his voice laced with panic. Grace ignored him, addressing the room instead. Everything Dr. Thompson said is true. I worked for one of the developers Harris is protecting. I've seen the emails, the payouts, the agreements to stall the clinic at all costs. The room collectively gasped. Harris shot to his feet. This is outrageous, she's lying. Grace held up a flash drive. This has all the proof you need, financial transactions, meeting notes, even a recording of Harris bragging about keeping her kind out of this town. The air in the room grew thick with tension. Maya felt a surge of vindication, but it was tempered by the reality of what Grace had just risked to come forward. You're finished, Harris, Maya said, her voice steady. The people of this town won't stand for your corruption any longer. The fallout. Before Harris could respond, Officer Daniels entered the chamber, his uniform crisp and his expression grim. He made his way to the front of the room, where Harris stood frozen in place. "Councilman Harris," Daniels said, his voice firm, "you're under arrest for corruption, fraud, and obstruction of justice." Harris's jaw dropped. "You can't be serious. This is a setup." Daniels ignored his protests, reading him his rights. As the audience watched in stunned silence, Maya felt a strange mix of relief and exhaustion as she watched Harris's hands being cuffed. For a moment, it seemed justice might finally prevail. The cliffhanger. As Harris was escorted out of the room, Mitchell rose from his seat, his expression dark. He approached Maya, leaning in close enough that only she could hear him. "This isn't over," he whispered. "You might have taken him down, but there are others who won't stop until you're gone." Maya didn't flinch. "Let them try." Mitchell smirked and walked away, leaving a chill in his wake. Maya turned to Linda and Grace, her resolve unshaken but her mind racing. The fight was far from over, and the stakes had only grown higher. As the crowd dispersed, Maya stepped outside, the cool night air grounding her. She glanced up at the stars, determination burning in her chest. Whatever came next, she would face it head on. The air in the council chamber was thick with tension. As Maya stood before the microphone, her shoulders squared, and her voice calm, but commanding. Harris's pale face was fixed in a tight-lipped sneer, the weight of her accusations pressing down on him. The audience watched in rapt silence as the battle of words reached a fever pitch. "You've spent months undermining this project, Harris," Maya said, her voice cutting through the room. "You've weaponized bureaucracy, spread false allegations, and turned the system into a tool for your corruption. And now, the truth is out." Harris shot up from his seat, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is slander. These so-called documents mean nothing. You think you can waltz into my town and dictate how we run things? You're delusional." Maya didn't flinch, her gaze locked on him. "Your town. That's what this is about, isn't it? Maintaining control, keeping power out of the hands of anyone who dares to challenge you." Harris leaned forward, his voice dropping to a growl. "You don't understand how things work here. This town has its traditions, its ways of doing things. People like you." "People like me?" Maya interrupted, stepping closer to the microphone. "Let's not pretend this is about tradition. This is about keeping people like me out of your circle of power. It's about fear. Fear of change, fear of progress, fear of accountability." The audience erupted into murmurs, the tension palpable as Harris struggled to regain his composure. His mask of authority had cracked, revealing the man beneath, angry, desperate, and cornered. The revelation. Suddenly, a voice rang out from the back of the room. "That's enough!" Officer Daniels stepped forward, his uniform immaculate, and his expression unreadable. The crowd parted as he made his way to the front, his boots echoing against the tiled floor. Harris's face twisted into a look of triumph, as though reinforcements had arrived to save him. "Officer Daniels," Harris began, his voice regaining some of its bluster. "Remove this woman, she's disrupting." Daniels raised a hand, silencing him. "No, Councilman. I'm here because we need to address something far more serious." Harris faltered, his smugness evaporating. "What are you talking about?" Daniels turned to the audience, his voice steady and authoritative. "For months, I've been asked to enforce actions against Dr. Thompson's clinic, raiding offices, confiscating materials, arresting her on baseless charges. I followed orders because I thought they were legitimate, but I've seen enough to know the truth." The audience gasped, a wave of shock rippling through the room. Harris's face darkened, his hands clenching into fists. Daniels continued, holding up a folder. "This is a report from an independent investigation. It confirms that Councilman Harris has been accepting bribes from developers to block the clinic's construction. These developers stand to gain millions if this project fails." He turned to face Harris, his expression cold. "You used your position to spread lies and manipulate this town for personal gain, and you used people like me to do your dirty work." Harris's mouth opened, but no words came out. His carefully constructed facade was crumbling under the weight of Daniel's words. Protagonist's strength. Maya stepped forward, her voice calm but laced with steel. "You wanted to silence me, Harris. You thought you could use fear and intimidation to protect your secrets, but the truth has a way of coming out. Harris glared at her, his face contorted with rage. "You think this changes anything? I'll fight this in court. I'll bury you in legal battles until you're broke and forgotten." Maya met his gaze without flinching. "Go ahead and try. But you won't just be fighting me, you'll be fighting every person in this room who's been waiting for someone to stand up to you." The audience erupted into cheers and applause, the tide turning firmly in Maya's favor. Harris's allies on the council exchanged uneasy glances, their loyalty to him wavering in the face of overwhelming evidence. Daniels stepped closer to Harris, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. "Councilman Harris, you're under arrest for corruption, fraud, and obstruction of justice." Harris recoiled, his voice rising in desperation. "This is a mistake. You can't do this." Daniels ignored him, reciting his rights as he cuffed Harris. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the once powerful councilman was led away, his shouts echoing down the hallway. High stakes. As the chamber settled, Maya felt a wave of relief wash over her. But it was short-lived. Mitchell, Harris's enforcer, stood at the edge of the room, his arms crossed and his eyes burning with fury. He made no move to intervene during the arrest, but as the crowd began to disperse, he approached Maya with slow, deliberate steps. "You think you've won, don't you?" he said, his voice low and venomous. "Taking down Harris is just the beginning. There are others who won't let this go." Maya squared her shoulders, refusing to be intimidated. "Let them come. I'm not backing down." Mitchell leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You should have stayed in your lane, Dr. Thompson. This fight isn't over." Before she could respond, he turned and walked away, his words hanging in the air like a threat. Maya's resolve remained strong, but a flicker of unease settled in her chest. The fight for justice was far from over, and the road ahead would be treacherous. Uncertainty. As Maya left the chamber, she was surrounded by reporters shouting questions, townsfolk offering words of support, and a few familiar faces who had once doubted her, but now looked at her with newfound respect. Linda and Grace met her at the steps, their expressions a mix of relief and determination. "You did it," Linda said, her voice warm but cautious. "Harris is finished." "For now," Maya replied, her gaze distant. "But Mitchell's right, this fight isn't over." Grace placed a hand on her arm. "You're not alone in this, Maya. We're with you." Maya nodded, drawing strength from their support. She glanced back at the council building, the weight of the day settling over her. The truth had come to light, but the system Harris represented was still intact, its roots deep and insidious. As she turned to face the crowd, her voice rang out, steady and resolute. "This is just the beginning. We have a long way to go, but together, we can make this town a place where justice prevails." The crowd erupted into cheers, but Maya couldn't shake the feeling that the battle was far from over. As she stepped into the cool evening air, her thoughts churned with plans for the next phase of the fight. She had won this round, but the war for justice and equity was just beginning. The arrest of Councilman Harris sent shockwaves through Eldridge. By the next morning, the town buzzed with news of the scandal. Front-page headlines detailed his corruption, the bribes from developers, and his deliberate obstruction of the community clinic. Maya's name was cleared, but the fight was far from over. At the clinic site, construction resumed under a bright, cloudless sky. Maya stood near the foundation, watching as workers began laying the framework for what would soon become a beacon of hope for the community. Linda and Grace joined her, their expressions a mixture of relief and pride. "I can't believe it's finally happening," Maya said softly, her voice tinged with both joy and exhaustion. Linda placed a hand on her shoulder. "You earned this, Maya, every bit of it. But don't forget, this is just the beginning." Maya nodded, knowing the truth of those words. The clinic was a victory, but the battle against systemic inequities was ongoing. Accountability. In the days following Harris's arrest, his empire of influence began to crumble. Mitchell, his enforcer, tried to maintain control, but the weight of public scrutiny proved too much. Investigations revealed his own involvement in Harris's schemes, leading to his removal from any town-related projects. His threats against Maya rang hollow now, his power diminished. Officer Daniels, once hesitant to take a stand, became an unlikely ally. His testimony against Harris carried weight, not only confirming Maya's accusations, but also highlighting the broader corruption within local law enforcement. Daniels had been complicit, but his willingness to step forward sparked a shift in the department. New policies were introduced, prioritizing transparency and accountability. Grace, too, found herself at the forefront of change. Her decision to expose Harris came at a personal cost, her ties to the developers severed and her career prospects uncertain, but the community rallied around her, recognizing her bravery. Maya ensured Grace had a role in the clinic's development, valuing her insights and determination to make amends. Maya's growth. For Maya, the ordeal had been a crucible. Standing in her newly furnished office at the clinic, she reflected on how far she had come. The fight had tested every ounce of her patience, resilience, and belief in herself. She had faced humiliation, danger, and doubt, yet she had emerged stronger, her resolve unshaken. The clinic wasn't just a building, it was a testament to perseverance. Maya's journey had taught her the importance of community and the power of collective action. Alone, she had felt isolated against the tide of opposition. Together, with allies like Linda, Grace, and even Daniels, she had achieved what once seemed impossible. As she gazed out the window, she spotted a group of children playing in the nearby park. The sight brought a rare smile to her face. This was why she had fought so hard. Not for accolades, but for them, for their future. Systemic change. The fallout from Harris's corruption scandal rippled across Eldridge. Town meetings became hubs of activism, with residents demanding greater oversight and transparency from their leaders. New voices emerged, teachers, shop owners, and young professionals, eager to shape a fairer, more inclusive town. Maya's clinic became a symbol of this change. It wasn't just a healthcare facility, it was a place where people could feel seen, valued, and heard. The clinic's community programs extended beyond medicine, offering workshops on civic engagement, financial literacy, and mentorship opportunities for the town's youth. National media picked up the story, framing Maya as a symbol of resilience against systemic injustice. While she appreciated the recognition, Maya remained focused on the work ahead. She knew the clinic was one victory in a much larger battle, but it was a foundation she could build upon. Emotional closure. One evening, after the day's work had ended, Maya sat on the front steps of the clinic, watching the sun set over the horizon. Grace joined her, carrying 2 cups of coffee. They sat in silence for a moment, the quiet wrapping around them like a warm blanket. "Did you ever think we'd get here?" Grace asked, her voice soft. "Honestly?" Maya replied, taking a sip of her coffee. "There were moments I wasn't sure, but every time I thought about giving up, I remembered why I started." Grace nodded, her gaze distant. "Harris is gone, but the system that let him thrive is still here. And that's why we keep fighting," Maya said, "one step at a time." They sat together, the weight of their journey settling into a calm resolve. For the first time in months, Maya felt a flicker of peace, not because the work was done, but because it was finally moving in the right direction. Future possibilities. The clinic opened its doors 2 months later to a packed waiting room. Families, seniors, and young professionals filled the space, their faces reflecting hope and relief. Maya moved through the crowd, greeting patients and staff, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. As she stepped into an exam room to check on a young boy, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She glanced at the screen, an email from a coalition of community leaders in a neighboring town, asking for her help in addressing similar challenges. Maya smiled to herself, tucking the phone away. Her journey wasn't over, it was expanding. A town transformed. As Eldridge began to heal, the town itself changed. The council saw a wave of new candidates, driven by the grassroots activism Maya's fight had inspired. The once divided community found common ground in their desire for progress. And though Harris's shadow still lingered, it no longer defined the town. His name became a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when power goes unchecked. In its place rose a narrative of resilience, fueled by people like Maya who refused to be silenced. As the stars began to dot the night sky, Maya locked the clinic doors and headed home. Her steps were lighter, her heart steadier. The battle had been long and grueling, but it had been worth every sacrifice. She wasn't just fighting for Eldridge anymore. She was fighting for every town, every person who had been told to stay quiet, to accept the way things were, and she was just getting started. Maya Thompson sat in her quiet office, the late afternoon sun casting long, golden beams across the room. The hum of activity outside, the low murmur of conversations, the distant laughter of children playing in the park, served as a gentle reminder of how far she had come. The events of the past months felt like a distant storm now, their intensity dulled, but their lessons etched deeply into her heart. Looking back, Maya could hardly believe everything she had endured. She had come to Eldridge with a simple mission: to build a clinic that would serve the community and provide equitable healthcare to those who needed it most. But her journey had quickly transformed into something far larger, forcing her to confront not only the systemic injustices embedded in the town's power structures, but also her own limits of endurance and strength. Growth through struggle. The ordeal had changed Maya in ways she hadn't anticipated. When she first faced Councilman Harris's obstruction, she had approached the situation with quiet determination, confident that truth and logic would prevail. But as the attacks escalated, from bureaucratic delays to baseless allegations and public humiliation, she realized that resilience required more than just resolve. It required adaptability, courage, and the ability to lean on others. Maya learned to fight not just for herself, but for those who couldn't fight for themselves. The people of Eldridge, those who showed up at town hall meetings, who sent messages of encouragement, who stood by her when it seemed the odds were insurmountable, became her inspiration. They reminded her why she had chosen this path in the first place: to make a difference, not just in one town, but in every corner of the country where systems like these thrived unchecked. She had also come to appreciate the value of allies Linda's steadfast legal expertise, Grace's courage in exposing Harris's corruption, and even Officer Daniel's eventual shift in conscience were all testaments to the power of collective action. Alone, the fight had felt overwhelming, but together, they had dismantled a structure that had stood unchallenged for years. The bigger picture. The events in Eldridge were more than just a personal battle. They were a microcosm of the systemic challenges faced by marginalized communities across the nation. Harris's actions, using his position to suppress progress, intimidate dissent, and enrich himself at the expense of others, were not unique to him. They were symptomatic of a larger problem: a system that too often prioritized the preservation of power over the needs of the people it was meant to serve. Maya's fight had uncovered the layers of bias and corruption that allowed such systems to persist. From the racist undertones of Harris's rhetoric to the bureaucratic red tape weaponized against her clinic, every obstacle she faced was a reminder that the road to equity was neither smooth nor straightforward. But her victory, however small in the grand scheme of things, proved that change was possible. The community had been galvanized by her struggle. Residents who once felt powerless now attended council meetings, spoke out against injustice, and demanded accountability from their leaders. Eldridge was no longer a town defined by apathy. It had become a town of action, where voices long silenced began to rise. A legacy of hope. The clinic itself became a symbol of this transformation. On its opening day, Maya stood at the entrance, watching as families filed in for checkups, vaccinations, and consultations. There was a palpable sense of hope in the air, a belief that this was just the beginning of something greater. Maya's thoughts often returned to the children she saw in the waiting room. They were the future, and the work she had done was as much for them as it was for the present. Every battle fought today meant fewer barriers for them tomorrow. And though the scars of her struggle remained, they served as reminders of the resilience it took to get here. Grace, now a key member of the clinic's advisory board, often spoke about how the events had changed her perspective. "I used to think the system was too big to fight," she told Maya one afternoon. "But you showed me that it's not about taking down the whole system at once, it's about finding the cracks and widening them until change becomes inevitable." Linda, too, reflected on the broader impact of their efforts. "Harris was just one piece of the puzzle," she said, "but exposing him sent a message. People like him are no longer untouchable. That matters." A call to action. For Maya, the journey didn't end with the clinic. Her story had gained national attention, and requests for help poured in from communities facing similar struggles. She began traveling to other towns, sharing her experiences, and helping others navigate the challenges of systemic injustice. Her work became a movement, one that inspired others to stand up, speak out, and demand better. To those watching her story, Maya's message was clear. Change starts with a single step. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by the magnitude of systemic problems, but every voice, every action, and every moment of courage matters. Progress is not a straight line, and setbacks are inevitable. But resilience and determination can move mountains. Closing reflection. As Maya sat in her office, the hum of the clinic around her, she allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. The fight in Eldridge had been grueling, and the scars it left, both visible and invisible, were still healing. But the lessons she had learned were invaluable. She had learned that power is not in the hands of those who seek to wield it for their own gain, but in the collective strength of those who refuse to back down. She had learned that resilience is not the absence of fear or doubt, but the ability to move forward despite them. And she had learned that change, no matter how small, is worth fighting for. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be new challenges, new battles to fight. But as Maya looked out her window at the bustling clinic and the vibrant community it served, she felt a deep sense of purpose. She was ready to keep moving forward, one step at a time, because the fight for justice never truly ends. And that, Maya realized, is what makes it worth fighting for.